That's the best you
Anger
can
had
do.
been building since President Prabowo took office last year.
The fucking bro, the One Piece shit is actually real.
People of Indonesia are really doing their big one right now. That is how you protest. That is how you tell your government you're done with the bullshit.
Here's the thing, this isn't just over there. Strip away the language and the flags, and what are people angry about? Corruption at the top, politicians living like kings, ordinary people crushed by rising costs, taxes and cuts. Sound familiar? Here in the UK, we've had MPs claiming for duck ponds, second homes and eye-watering expenses while we're told to tighten our belts. So, what do you think? Could we ever see scenes like Indonesia here in Britain? Or would the British public just carry on swallowing it?
And so when you read these headlines about how protesters are rioting and they're violent, this is why they're protesting. And this is what the police do when they're supposed to be protecting the citizens, but instead they protect the people in power.
Sekarang, situasi di Indonesia tidak bagus. Banyak masalah di Bandung, Jakarta, Makassar juga, everywhere. Tapi, orang Indonesia harus bantu orang Indonesia.
Demo besar di Indonesia belakangan ini bikin heboh bukan cuma di dalam negeri, tapi juga jadi sorotan dunia. Ribuan orang turun ke jalan, bersuara lantang melawan ketidakadilan. Banyak yang bilang inilah contoh nyata bagaimana rakyat bisa bersatu memperjuangkan hak mereka.
That's the best you
Anger
can
had
do.
been building since President Prabowo took office last year.
The fucking bro, the One Piece shit is actually real. Like, I remember whenever people were telling me about this yesterday, and I was like, oh, there's no way that's real. But apparently it is, yeah. Is that a good thing in your opinion?
People of Indonesia are really doing their big one right now. That is how you protest. That is how you tell your government you're done with the bullshit. They're protesting because there's corruption in the government where representatives are getting a raise. Meanwhile, the working class is dealing with high unemployment and high cost of living. There's a creator on here, I tagged her below. She does a really good job of breaking it down and make it easy to understand the conflict and what's going on, so I would definitely give that a watch. The government has met the protesters with force, is also taking part in censorship. One of the ways the government is trying to censor what's going on in Indonesia is by talking to social media apps. This app disabled the live feature because they want to keep their live feeds civil and friendly. The government censoring social media when these protests have already gotten violent is not good. That's not good. That's scary. Like, we know how bad police brutality is at protests in America because of social media. Like, globally, I feel like these governments know that, like, they are losing control over their people. And so they are, like, trying to take away, like, the democratic processes. Like, rather than give the power to the people, it's like, nope, full-on authoritarian, like, regime.
What happens when people have finally had enough? Look at Indonesia right now. Streets on fire, parliament buildings torched, people dead, and it all started with politicians stuffing their pockets while ordinary people can barely afford food. Here's the story. Indonesian lawmakers were exposed for awarding themselves some massive housing perks. Then in the protests that followed, a 21-year-old was killed after being run over by a police vehicle. The clip went viral and the whole country erupted. Buildings have been set ablaze, ministers' homes ransacked, and people are openly saying they don't trust the government anymore. But here's the thing, this isn't just over there. Strip away the language and the flags, and what are people angry about? Corruption at the top, politicians living like kings, ordinary people crushed by rising costs, taxes and cuts. Sound familiar? Here in the UK, we've had MPs claiming for duck ponds, second homes and eye-watering expenses while we're told to tighten our belts. We've got tax hikes, energy bills through the roof, food inflation, and a justice system that just feels broken. Now ask yourself, if people in Indonesia can snap like this, they can turn their anger into fire and flames. What's stopping that same level of fury building here? Could you ever imagine our parliament, our council buildings under siege from the very people they're supposed to serve? It might sound outrageous, but when enough people feel ignored, robbed and pushed to the brink, history shows it doesn't stay quiet for long. So, what do you think? Could we ever see scenes like Indonesia here in Britain? Or would the British public just carry on swallowing it? Let me know in the comments and follow for more news, views and comfortable truths.
Here's a debrief on everything going on in Indonesia and why there's protests currently. These protests have erupted over privileges for parliament members and the corrupt elites. The president of Indonesia has quite an austerity drive, and recently it's come out that parliament members have a housing allowance that is 10 times the minimum wage. Correction, almost 10 times. Protests have escalated exactly the way that you'd expect them. Imagine all the protests that are going on in the States and all of the tactics that law enforcement are using against civilians. Copy and paste that. You've got Indonesia. Except the civilians in Indonesia are stone throwing. These protests are protesting to get rid of all of these lavish allowances, which is on top of the lawmaker's salary. They're also calling out the corrupt elites within Indonesia and bringing up the fact that the military has seeped its way into everyday life. Back in March, Indonesia passed a law that's allowing the military to take on more civilian posts. In July, the government said that the military was going to start manufacturing pharmaceuticals. And then this month, the government announced, I think, 100 new battalions that were going to take up animal husbandry and agriculture. This comes amid cut to education, health, and public works. What are your thoughts on this? I'd love to hear in the comments below. And if you're looking for pocket-sized politics, you're in the right spot.
We're going to talk about some world news and what is happening in Indonesia. Student-led protests have erupted in opposition to the government. The protests started because over 580 parliamentarians were given housing allowances, which are the equivalent of $3,000 a month. And that is on top of their salaries. The housing allowance on its own would be 20 times the minimum wage in poor areas of the country. According to the World Bank, 68% of Indonesia's population, which is about 195 million people, live below the poverty line, earning about $8.30 USD per day. Indonesian government officials can take home anywhere in between 10 to 15,000 USD per month. In some areas, there has been reports that the government has failed to pay teachers and healthcare workers. Protests started last Monday with people demanding they cut the salaries of parliamentarians. On Thursday, a video surfaced of a man who was making a food delivery on a motorcycle when an armored police vehicle ran over him. He was not a part of the protests and was literally just working and trying to make a living and trying to survive. Obviously, he died. And on Friday, the protests intensified across the country with people burning cars and buildings. Protesters stormed the governor's office compound in the second largest city of the country. Protesters fought the security with fireworks and wooden clubs. And then 3 people died when the legislature building was set fire in Makassar. It's crazy times. I will keep you guys updated.
If you love traveling or vacationing anywhere in Indonesia like Bali, you should probably know why most of Indonesia, or at least most of Jakarta, is protesting right now. And even in most major cities outside of Jakarta, because every headline that you'll read about these protests in the West are probably going to be about how the protests are incredibly violent and people are rioting. When the protests started, because parliament members are receiving like around $3,000 in housing, just for housing outside of their salary, which $3,000 in Indonesia is a ton of money. And outside of that, people in Indonesia are suffering from insane inflation and insane cost of living. And then during these protests, I think during the weekend, during one of the protests, a Gojek rider who was delivering food was hit by a riot police car, and once the police car hit the driver, the police car kept going and ran him over again, and the Gojek driver died. And if you've ever visited Indonesia, you know that Gojek and Grab drivers are basically like the backbone of the country. And so when you read these headlines about how protesters and are rioting and they're violent, this is why they're protesting. And this is what the police do when they're supposed to be protecting the citizens, but instead they protect the people in power.
Tunggu, Johannes. Democracy di Indonesia. What kita tahu, democracy di Indonesia, right? Free speech, tidak bisa. TikTok, block your banyak content. Social media, block your banyak content. Take down video. Kita tahu dia taking down video. Saya harus appeal video saya karena dia mau take down. Kita ada threats. Sekarang, situasi di Indonesia tidak bagus. Banyak masalah di Bandung, Jakarta, Makassar juga. Everywhere. Tapi, orang Indonesia harus bantu orang Indonesia. Support business kecil. Support orang di komunitas kamu. Dan coba bantu. Pelan-pelan. Kita menang. Saya tidak bisa bantu account saya kecil. Saya coba. It's the best I can do.
Di luar negeri, orang-orang ikut memperhatikan. Dari Asia sampai Eropa, banyak yang kagum dengan keberanian rakyat Indonesia. Mereka melihat bahwa demo ini bukan sekadar aksi marah-marah, tapi wujud nyata perlawanan terhadap sistem yang dianggap tidak adil. Yang bikin dunia tercengang adalah semangat rakyat Indonesia yang nggak takut bersuara. Mereka menolak fasilitas berlebihan untuk para pejabat, sementara rakyat kecil masih susah cari makan. Aksi ini jadi pengingat buat banyak negara. Suara rakyat itu nggak bisa diremehkan. Kalau rakyat sudah bersatu, siapapun yang duduk di kursi kekuasaan harus siap mendengarkan. Beberapa komentar dari luar negeri bahkan membandingkan dengan kondisi mereka sendiri. Mereka merasa masalahnya mirip, biaya hidup tinggi, politisi hidup enak, tapi belum ada gerakan sebesar yang dilakukan di Indonesia. Makanya, demo Indonesia disebut-sebut sebagai contoh nyata bagaimana rakyat bisa mengubah kemarahan jadi kekuatan. Singkatnya, demo di Indonesia udah melampaui batas nasional. Dunia melihat, belajar, bahkan bercermin lewat aksi ini. Pesannya jelas, jangan pernah remehkan suara rakyat, karena kalau mereka sudah bersatu, suaranya bisa mengguncang dunia.